What does it take to build an empire? Is it grit? Is it genius? Is it a single game-changing stroke of luck? For one American family, it was all of the above and more. Their story begins not in a pristine corporate headquarters, but deep within the earth, with a man who seemed to possess an almost supernatural connection to the land. He was an uneducated prospector, a man more comfortable with the heft of a pickaxe than the weight of a pen, who single-handedly pulled a staggering, almost unimaginable fortune out of the rock and the dirt. But that incredible wealth, a fortune that would make him one of the richest men in America, was merely the foundation. It was just the beginning. This is the sprawling, wild, and almost unbelievable story of how a Gilded Age mining fortune was transformed, funding the creation of one of the largest, most influential, and most controversial media machines the world had ever seen. It's a multi-generational saga, jam-packed with raw ambition, shocking scandal, and a legacy that even now continues to quietly and profoundly shape our world. The epic of the Hearst family doesn't start in a boardroom or a bank. It starts in the mud and dust of the American frontier. The story begins in a humble log cabin in rural Missouri where George Hearst was born in 1820. His father was a farmer, but not a particularly successful one. The family was perpetually haunted by the specter of debt, a constant, grinding pressure that surely shaped young George's view of the world. With very little formal schooling available to him, it seemed George was destined for a life of hard, anonymous labor. Another farmer's son fated to fight the same battles his father had. But George was different. He possessed a strange, almost mystical gift. While other boys learned to read books, George learned to read the land. He had a powerful intuition, a gut feeling for the hidden architecture of the earth, an uncanny sense of where valuable minerals were buried deep beneath the surface. It was a talent that was both unexplainable and undeniable. It's said that local indigenous people, observing his unique connection to the terrain, called him the boy that the earth talks to. It was a poetic nickname that would, in time, prove to be astonishingly accurate. The first test of his abilities came with tragedy. When his father died in 1846, the 26-year-old George, despite his lack of education, took charge of the family's dire finances. He didn't just stabilize the farm, he quickly made it profitable. He paid off every last cent of his father's suffocating debts, in part by using his innate geological sense to lease out local mineral mines. But the quiet life in Missouri wasn't big enough to contain his ambition. When sensational news of the California gold rush rippled across the country in 1849, a siren call of untold riches, he knew instinctively that his destiny lay to the west. His arrival in Minas, California, however, was no story of instant success. The gold rush was a chaotic lottery, and George's first attempts to get rich were duds. He tried his luck panning for gold in the crowded riverbeds near Placerville and Grass Valley, standing shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other hopefuls, but came away with next to nothing. This kind of surface-level prospecting wasn't his game. George's real, unique talent wasn't in sifting through what was already loose. It was in seeing the potential locked deep inside the earth, in the solid veins of rock. He shifted his focus, going after quartz lodes, the hard rock sources of gold. It was here he finally hit his first major success with the Merrimack Hill mine. Through this experience, he developed a simple but brilliant strategy. Find a promising claim, dig just enough to prove its value to others, and then sell it for a quick, tidy profit. This find-and-flip approach was smart and effective. It provided him with a comfortable living and a solid reputation, but it wasn't the stuff of legends. That moment arrived in 1859. The whispers had started, tales of a massive silver strike near Virginia City, in what was then the Utah Territory. It was an area that would soon become world-famous as the legendary Comstock Lode. Acting on a tip from a fellow prospector, George took a huge risk. He gathered what money he had, about a few $1,000s, and bought a 1/6 share in a claim called the Ophir Mine. It was a speculative gamble based on little more than a rumor and his own gut feeling. That tiny investment, that 1/6 share, would explode into a fortune. The Ophir became one of the foundational mines of the Comstock, one of the richest silver strikes in the history of the world. Almost overnight, George Hearst was a made man, a millionaire. He then made his most important strategic move. He teamed up with two brilliant financiers from San Francisco. Together, They created a powerful partnership that would grow to become the largest private mining firm in the United States. While his partners managed the books and crunched the numbers from their city offices, George was the indispensable boots on the ground. He was the expert, the man who never stopped prospecting, whose instincts were the company's most valuable asset. His gut feelings led him from one legendary find to the next, cementing his status as a titan of the industry. In 1872, he heard of a claim in Utah and bought what became the Ontario Mine, a property that would go on to produce millions upon millions in silver and lead for decades. In 1877, he listened to a story from a pair of down-on-their-luck prospectors in the Black Hills of South Dakota. He trusted his read of the men and the land, paying them $70,000 for their claim. That mine, the Homestake, became the largest and deepest gold mine in all of North America. It was a seemingly endless source of wealth, the bedrock of the Hearst family fortune for the next 100 years. Then, as if to prove his gift one more time, in 1881, he took a meeting with a prospector named Marcus Daly. On the strength of Daly's word alone, George blindly bought a quarter interest in what he believed was a silver mine in a rough-and-tumble camp called Butte, Montana. That claim, the Anaconda, turned out to be something else entirely. Discovered just as Thomas Edison's light bulb was about to create an insatiable global demand for copper wire. By the 1880s, George Hearst was no longer just a lucky prospector. He was a self-made multimillionaire who had completely mastered his industry. He had built an empire of minerals, a tangible fortune hammered out of the American West. He bought a sprawling ranch at San Simeon for his family to use as a getaway and, leveraging his wealth and power, was even elected a U.S. Senator from California. He had achieved the American dream on a scale few could imagine. But the next chapter of the family's story wouldn't be forged in the darkness of a mine. It would be forged in the bright, messy, and loud world of newsprint. If George Hearst was the embodiment of the 19th century industrialist, a grizzled, practical prospector who built a tangible empire from the ground up, his son, William Randolph, was the prototype of the 20th century showman. He was flamboyant, arrogant, and obsessed not with material substance, but with the power of image and influence. Where George hammered out a fortune in the mines, William would hammer out a media empire. Ironically, the Hearst family's historic pivot from mining to media began not as a grand strategy, but as the settlement of a gambling debt. In 1880, Senator George Hearst reluctantly took ownership of a local newspaper, the San Francisco Examiner, from a friend to settle a poker debt. To George, a man who dealt in gold, silver, and copper, a newspaper was a frivolous thing, a money-losing political toy. He had absolutely no interest in publishing. His deepest hope was that his only son, William, would eventually get his act together and take over the far more serious and profitable business of running the family's mining operations. But William Randolph Hearst, born in 1863, had profoundly different plans for his life. Sent to Harvard, he proved to be a lackluster student, but a masterful provocateur. He became utterly fascinated by the loud, sensational new style of journalism, being pioneered on the East Coast by figures like Joseph Pulitzer. This was a journalism of the people, or at least for the people, filled with crusades, stunts, and screaming headlines. William was eventually and famously expelled from Harvard for a series of wild pranks, the most legendary of which involved sending his professors ornate chamber pots with their portraits meticulously painted on the inside. For a man like William, the future was not in the dark, quiet solitude of a mine shaft, but in the bright, chaotic, and commanding spotlight of the daily press. In 1887, at the age of 24, after years of pleading, he finally convinced his deeply skeptical father to give him control of the failing San Francisco Examiner. George, likely seeing it as a way to keep his restless son occupied, finally gave in, reportedly telling a friend, "I've given the boy the Examiner. I don't suppose it will do him much harm." William immediately got to work, pouring his father's mining money into the dull, unprofitable paper. He declared his mission was to create a monarch of the dailies. He hired the best and most famous writers he could find. He completely redesigned the paper, filling its pages with screaming, oversized headlines, dramatic illustrations and photographs, and scandalous stories of crime, corruption, and high society affairs. Circulation, which had been dismal, exploded. When George Hearst died in 1891, William inherited a share of a massive fortune built on gold from the homestake, silver from the Comstock, and copper from the Anaconda. That steady, reliable mining money became the rocket fuel for his media ambitions. The newspapers themselves often lost staggering amounts of money, but William didn't care. The profits from the mines were so immense they could subsidize his endless expansion. In 1895, with his mother Phoebe's significant financial assistance, he decided to take on the biggest market in the country. He bought the struggling New York Morning Journal and immediately declared war on his own hero, Joseph Pulitzer, and his top dog paper, the New York World. A vicious, no-holds-barred circulation war broke out. Hearst dropped the price of his paper to just 1 penny, making it accessible to even the poorest readers. In a stunning act of corporate raiding, he swiped Pulitzer's entire, star-studded Sunday staff by offering them unheard-of salaries. This included the artist Richard F. Outcault, the creator of the wildly popular color comic The Yellow Kid. Pulitzer hired another artist to keep his own version going, and soon New York had 2 Yellow Kid comics. The frantic, sensationalist, and often factually dubious competition between the two papers gave the nation a new, enduring term for this style of reporting: yellow journalism. Hearst's formula was a runaway, unprecedented success. He understood a fundamental truth about mass audiences. News wasn't just information, it was entertainment. His papers were loud, emotional, unapologetically biased, and incredibly compelling. They spoke to the gut, not the intellect. He is famously, though perhaps apocryphally, quoted as telling his illustrator, Frederick Remington, who was stationed in a quiet, pre-war Cuba, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." While historians debate whether he actually sent that specific cable, the sentiment was undeniably accurate. His papers, particularly the New York Journal, relentlessly whipped up public anger against Spain with exaggerated, dramatic, and sometimes completely fabricated stories of Spanish atrocities in Cuba. This media campaign played a huge and undeniable part in pushing a reluctant United States into the Spanish-American War in 1898. Through the early 1900s, his empire grew at a jaw-dropping rate. He bought or started newspapers in nearly every major American city, from Boston to Chicago, Los Angeles to Atlanta. At his absolute peak in the 1930s, William Randolph Hearst controlled a coast-to-coast chain of 28 major daily newspapers. It's estimated that his papers reached 1 out of every 4 families in America on a daily basis. But he didn't stop with newspapers. Long before the term was ever coined, he built a true multimedia conglomerate. He snapped up popular magazines, recognizing their different appeal, and added titles, like Cosmopolitan, Good Housekeeping, and Harper's Bazaar to his portfolio. He ventured into the glamorous new world of motion pictures, starting a film studio, Cosmopolitan Productions, which existed primarily to produce lavish vehicles to boost the career of his longtime mistress, the talented actress Marion Davies. He created Hearst Metrotone News, a newsreel service that played in movie theaters across the country, shaping public perception through moving images. He established a wire service to instantly syndicate his stories and editorials to all his papers, and even founded one of the first commercial radio stations. His King Features syndicate became a comics powerhouse, launching timeless and beloved strips like Blondie, Flash Gordon, and Popeye. By the late 1920s, William Randolph Hearst was arguably the most powerful media mogul on the planet. He was a political kingmaker whose personal opinions, crusades, and vendettas were blasted out daily to an audience of millions. He used his empire as a personal weapon, supporting his favorite causes and brutally attacking his enemies. A one-time progressive Democrat, he later became a staunch conservative, using his nationwide platform to attack President Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose New Deal policies he furiously claimed were a form of communism. His life became as extravagant as his headlines. On the massive San Simeon ranch his father had purchased decades earlier, he began construction on a mind-bogglingly opulent palace. Known as Hearst Castle, it was a sprawling, fantastical estate stuffed with priceless art and entire rooms purchased from European castles, where he entertained a constant stream of Hollywood stars, political giants, and international luminaries. He had become a monarch of his own making, ruling over a kingdom of paper and ink. The very things that fueled Hearst's spectacular rise, his wild, unrestrained spending, and the massive, over-leveraged scale of his empire, also made it a sitting duck for an economic catastrophe. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the entire economic model of his business shattered. Advertising revenue, the lifeblood of his newspapers and magazines, dried up almost overnight. His debt-drowned conglomerate, already financially precarious, began to sink. By 1937, the situation was dire. The man who had run the world's biggest media empire, who had advised presidents and started wars, was staring down the barrel of personal and corporate bankruptcy. In a moment of ultimate humiliation, he was forced to hand over financial control of his own company, Hearst Corporation, to a team of outside trustees. Their job was to save the company from its founder. They began a brutal process of liquidation, selling off subsidiary companies, closing unprofitable newspapers, and, most painfully for Hearst, auctioning off huge chunks of his beloved, world-famous art collection, just to raise cash and keep the core business alive. Ironically, in this moment of crisis for the media empire, it was his father's original business that threw him a lifeline. The steady, reliable profit still flowing from the home stake mine, along with income from other inherited mining and timber assets, provided the crucial cash flow that helped the corporation pull through its darkest days. The tangible wealth of the earth saved the ephemeral empire of ink. William Randolph Hearst died in 1951 at the age of 88, having spent his last years largely as a recluse, a titan out of time. But the empire he built didn't die with him. The company, which had been restructured and placed under a family trust designed to prevent it from ever being broken up, survived. It learned from its near-death experience, becoming more cautious, more diversified, and more adaptable. It slowly changed, embracing new technologies and new tastes. One of its most brilliant moves came decades later. In 1990, the Hearst Corporation made a savvy, forward-looking investment, buying a 20% stake in a little-known 24-hour cable sports network called ESPN for roughly $170 million. That single investment, a quiet gamble compared to the loud crusades of its founder, has proven to be one of the most lucrative in media history. Today, that stake is worth billions and has been a massive, reliable engine for the company's profits for decades. Today, Hearst Communications is a thriving, privately held, global media and business information powerhouse. While it still owns newspapers and dozens of iconic magazines, a huge portion of its profits now comes from less glamorous but highly profitable sectors like business data, financial services through its ownership of Fitch Ratings, and its stake in cable networks like A&E and ESPN. In a testament to its incredible resilience and transformation, the company posted record revenues in 2024, reaching a reported $13 billion. The family fortune is managed through a complex trust designed to keep the company intact for future generations, while other assets like the vast Hearst ranches in California are still in operation, a direct link to the days of George Hearst. The story of the Hearst family is a sweeping American saga, a dramatic arc that captures the very essence of the nation's evolution over 150 years. It kicks off with the raw grit and intuitive genius of a 19th century prospector who could seemingly read the Earth's secrets, a man who built a colossal fortune from absolute scratch. That fortune, born from the tangible wealth of gold, silver, and copper, was then spectacularly and riskily transformed by his son into a completely different kind of empire, one of information, influence, entertainment, and power. It's a journey from the dirt of rural Missouri to the deep mines of the American West, from the screaming headlines of Gilded Age New York to the quiet, powerful boardrooms of a modern, diversified media giant. The Hearst dynasty stands as a stunning, almost literary example of how wealth and power can be built, nearly lost and then fundamentally rebuilt and redefined across generations. Their story didn't just shape the history of American business, it shaped the very way we consume news, the nature of entertainment, and the culture we live in today. It leaves us with one final vital question. In a world now drowning in the kind of mass media he pioneered, what is the true and lasting legacy of the man who first showed us its incredible and often terrifying power? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating business dynasties, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the empires that shaped our world. And don't forget to check out our other videos. See you in the next one.